This whole idea of announcing and preparing. When I was growing up, the most famous announcer, I guess, was Michael Buffer. You remember Michael Buffer? He was the big ring announcer, and he trademarked the phrase, "Let's get ready to rumble." You remember this guy? Always dressed up in a tuxedo, and it was typically in boxing matches. And so he would get out and he would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world." And I probably ought to not say it because we're on television, and if I do that, I'm probably breaking his trademark, so I won't go through the rest of it. But he would yell out his trademark, "Let's get ready to rumble," and he would introduce the fighters, and he would bring everybody there just to a level of pandemonium as he introduced this event that was to come. Now that's one of my other dreams in life. You know, if the preaching gig doesn't work out, I always thought it'd be fun to be at Turner Field or Phillips Arena or the Georgia Dome and be the guy who announced the football teams coming on. I just think it would be fun to whip the crowd into a frenzy as the lights go down and the fog machine goes off and the people come running through the tunnel. I think that would only be second to the one running through the tunnel and everybody yelling and screaming for you, but that's not going to happen. So John the Baptist is all about preparing others for someone else that's coming behind him. If we look at this whole story, it's a series of announcements, and we know as we build toward Christmas Eve that more and more announcements come. We know that all along the way, there are people that are sent to prepare others for something that is about to happen. Now, we've had fun in our house these past couple of weeks because I don't know if any of you have ever paid attention that my middle initial is Z, and that is for Zacharias. And so Zach's name is Zacharias, and he goes by Zach, which is the short form of that. And so we've been learning about Elizabeth and Zechariah, who find themselves just a little earlier in this chapter. And we find out about the announcement that is made about John the Baptist. And we were trying to trace all this lineage and all these roots. And if you look in the Bible, there's actually in the New King James Version and the King James Version, it's not Zechariah, but it is actually Zacharias. And so that name's found right there in the Bible. And we read about this week, and we read about the fact that the angel comes to Zacharias in a dream and says, "You're going to have a baby, and you're going to name him John." But Zacharias didn't believe him. Zacharias was a priest in the temple, and it was his one chance in his whole life to go and burn incense before the altar. And when he made his way into that room, he was visited by the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord told him this, and he didn't believe it. So the angel said, "That's fine. You're not going to be able to speak until your son is born." Now, Shannon's hoping that would come true in our household, that somehow the angel of the Lord would appear to me and Zacharias, and I wouldn't be able to speak for a while. I think that would be an answer to prayer for her during this Advent season. But nonetheless, John the Baptist was born, and we found out that the importance lies in the fact that John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin. It's cool how all this comes together and how all of these announcements are made, that each one at a time, is prepared for what is about to happen. Because the truth of the matter is that all of this stuff is crazy. I've long since said that, when we talk about biblical stories, we tell these stories and we've heard them, those of us that grew up in church or have been around church for a really long time, we've heard all these stories and we listen to them and we go, "Yep, that makes sense." Dude's out in the woods in a camel hair coat with honey and locusts stuck in his beard, yelling at people, essentially cussing at them, and they're coming in droves to be baptized by him. Yeah, when I tell it that way, it doesn't make so much sense, does it? When I tell it that way, you wonder why in the world would anybody follow this guy out into the woods? Why would God choose this man to be the one to introduce Jesus? These introductions are so important. Really, truth of the matter is that John the Baptist was the opening act. We've all been to shows, right? We've all been to concerts, and there's the marquee name that's in the concert, and there's always an opening act. And the marquee band has all the fancy equipment and everything, and the opening band's kind of out there in front with their little drum set up, and they have to plug into some old beat-up amps, and then they play, and everybody kind of listens to them, but all they really want is to hear the main act. And then comedians, all kind of different people have opening acts. And often what it does, I think, is you get the opening act, and then two things happen. Is it gets you more excited for the main event, and you also think, well, compared to that, this main event's got to be a lot better. Steve Harvey just is a funny comedian. I wish I could show you this. Several months ago, when we still had Sunday night worship, we showed this the week I was preaching on laughter is the best medicine. But I encourage you this week to go on YouTube and Google Steve Harvey introduces Jesus and watch that. Have any of you seen that? Who's seen that? Has anybody seen Steve Harvey introduces Jesus? Y'all, this is hilarious. Steve Harvey, he gets on stage and he gives a testimony. He talks about his years in show business and the fact that he's cleaned up his act over the years, and he's drawn closer to God, and he's got back to the faith that his mom taught him early on. And he talks about all the great people that he's been the opening act for, that he has opened up for some of these most famous comedians. And he was the host of the show at the Apollo on Showtime for many, many years. And he said just by nature of being a comedian, he's been a master of ceremony, and he's got to introduce all these people. And then he gets real serious, and he said, but you know what I wonder? I wonder what it would be like to bring out Jesus on stage. He said, because it's going to happen, because my mom kept telling me someday Jesus is going to come back. In this first part of Advent, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that second coming of Jesus that is explained to us, or revealed to us in Revelations, or at least is veiled in that book. And as we read these lessons in the first part of Advent, we're reminded that Jesus comes into the world for the first time again every year at Christmas, but that Jesus will come again and bring all of us to himself. And he said, I just wonder what it would be like to bring out Jesus. I'm not even going to try to do it because I wouldn't do it justice. But he gets so excited, and the crowd gets excited. And the funniest part of it, he says, he still holds the record for the world's largest fish fry. He fed 5,000 hungry souls with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he goes on, he just gets the crowd whipped into a frenzy. And he says, get up on your feet. And now I know for some that may seem a little sacrilegious, but it's Steve Harvey's way of saying, this is a man that is important to me. We ought to be excited when Christ comes into our lives, whenever he comes in. And what a privilege that John the Baptist had to introduce him. You know, these days with all kind of announcements that go out, you know, the latest deal, we all used to just send out invitations to things, right? So if we were having a birthday party, we'd send out an invitation to the birthday party. If we were going to get married, we'd send out an invitation to our wedding. But now we get the pre-invitation, the save the date card, right? Because we plan so far in advance that you got to spend. I think it's the stationery companies. I mean, it's got to be some kind of. I mean, they get to sell us 2 invitations, you know, a save the date card, and then an invitation to come to the party, and then maybe an invitation to the post party, who knows? But you got to save the date. Well, for us as Christians, there are several dates that we save throughout the course of the year. The fact of the matter is that every Sunday morning should be a date that we save. For many Christians, there's a couple dates they save in particular, Easter and Christmas, and one time of the year they come into church and there's some poinsettias, and another time of the year they come into church and some lilies. They think there's always fresh flowers all over the altar at church. But you know what? That's okay. If they're there 2 days a year, then maybe I can get that to 4, and then maybe I can get that to 6, and maybe I can get that to 8. And eventually, every Sunday is a save the date. Because the reality is that every Sunday we have the privilege of welcoming God's Spirit into this place. We have the ability to welcome Christ into our hearts. And quite frankly, there's nothing particularly special about this room. It's very special. It's been here since 1903. Lots of people have come its way. But as far as inviting Christ to our heart, it can happen in this room, it can happen in the street, it can happen at home. There's many places that it can happen. But I believe, I was as a Christian minister, that when we gather together, when we come together as God's family in God's house, God is here in a special way, and we're able to welcome God into this place. We can expect Christ to be present. Now, I'm not John the Baptist. I don't eat locusts and don't eat honey, and I try to dress up a little better. Although I do have a camel hair coat this morning. I probably should have worn that to preach in. That kind of would have rounded out the illustration. But my job is to introduce to you each Sunday in a new way who God is, who Christ is, and what we can become through him. And lest you think you get off easy, when you leave here, your job is to introduce Christ to others, to prepare the way for Christ to enter into their hearts. So my question for each of us this morning is, are we prepared? And are we willing to prepare others? Are we willing to be John the Baptist today, over the next few weeks, and in the year to come? I'd lay off the brood of vipers stuff. That doesn't work these days. But I would let them know who Jesus is, why he came into the world, and how he can change their lives. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We will now move to our service of Holy Communion. If you'll join me by turning in your hymnals to page 12 as we move toward the sacrament.